it's always quite possible to get a bunch of data and then they say, oh my gosh, that makes no sense at all. So then we would go through product by product in this case and said, does this make sense? And then this is, it's kind of fun actually. And it's kind of interesting. It always happens. Sales says, gosh, I didn't realize we had all those quotes for this item out there. That's actually a good thing, or that's actually concerning. It depends on the product.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. Sales and operations planning is a dark art, and most organizations typically have a very ad hoc process of forecasting due to its nature. But it's critical to be directionally correct with your plan, or you might end up missing opportunities or losing customers. Also, planning is more than just creating a model on a spreadsheet. It requires you to come up with estimates and iterate until every external or internal stakeholder agrees with the plan. In today's episode, our guest, Lisa Anderson, shares her insights on why it is important to be directionally correct with sales and operations planning. She also discusses similarities in the planning for products such as Coli and 737 aircraft and how involved they both could be. Finally, she discusses why you might not get much value in being too detailed at the item level and why you will need to take an iterative approach to come up with the forecast. Let me introduce Lisa to you. Lisa Anderson is the founder and president of LMA Consulting Group Incorporation, a consulting firm that specializes in manufacturing strategies and end-to-end supply chain transformation that maximizes the customer experience and enables profitable, scalable, dramatic business growth. She has been named in the top 46 most influential in supply chain by SAP, a top 40 B2B tech influencer by Arcady Group, and a top 50 ERP influencer by Washington Frank. She recently published Future Proofing Manufacturing and Supply Chain Post COVID-19, an ebook on successfully emerging and thriving post COVID-19. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hey Lisa, welcome to the show.
Great, I'm glad to be here.
And I am super excited to have you as well, the kind of authority you have in the sales and operations and the ERP. It's going to be so insightful for our listeners. Just to kick things off, Lisa, do you want to start with your personal story and your current focus?
Sure, of course. So when I was young, I participated in all sorts of activities. My parents grew up during the Depression, or their parents did.
Oh, wow.
And so they really didn't get a chance to do much of anything. So my mom thought we should. So I was in chess, I was in swimming, ice skating, you name it, and I've done it, ballet, etc. So I had all sorts of opportunities, which I'm really thankful for. But it allowed me to think about, maximizing variables and, how do you do multiple things at once and make take something from everything you try. Yeah. So I use that in my work with manufacturers and distributors. And what sales and operations planning really is all about is maximizing all sorts of variables. How do we figure out how to grow the business while also understanding capacity and inventory, and how do you make the best of whatever situation you have at hand? So I actually can thank my parents for getting me into this field.
Yeah, and I have heard this from a lot of people. Whatever you do as a child, if you are going to do a lot more, obviously you are going to have a well-rounded personality. So kudos to you and your parents that you are able to do so much even right now because of your involvement in a lot of different communities. And then you mentioned about the SNOP. Yes, you are right that it is really maximizing based on all of the variables that we have. So obviously, we are going to take a deep dive into the SNOP planning and going to cover some of the stories that you are planning to share. But before we do that, we have one of the standard questions, Lisa, that we ask every single guest, and that is going to be your perspective on business growth.
Well, I think it's going to be a time like no other.
Yeah.
Since the Great Depression. I think there's going to be, the winners are going to be separating from the losers at a breakneck speed in the next year. I think there's vast opportunity on the horizon.
I completely agree. I think, I like the way you are comparing this time with Great Depression, and things are similar. And you are right that the people who are putting the prep work are probably going to be the. So let's jump right into the sales and operations planning. And I always like to connect the dots. So since you seem to be talking about, obviously recession and depression, and now we are sort of coming out of it. And obviously, we can do something related to sales and operations planning. So the customers that you are working with right now, do you have any particular customers in mind that are doing special prep work to prep for the opportunity that you just mentioned?
Yes, absolutely. Would you like me to tell you about one?
Yeah. Go deep in those stories. I'm looking to know everything about those.
Okay, well, there's one that's in the healthcare products, cell and gene therapy type of product. And they have this section of their unit that's really important because it's fighting critical diseases like E. coli. And they have significant growth coming their way. Okay. However, the problem is that at a company level, of course, sales is, can provide a high level forecast. They can say, we think we're going to grow by 100% this year. However, that is not translated into how many types of different products, what types of products, what production lines, getting the details behind that is non-existent. So they would have trouble. They've been having some trouble servicing customers because the back end doesn't know what to do to get in front of the situation. So do you want me to carry on and tell you what we did? Tell us more. I don't know if you are actively working with them at this point of time. So yes, you mentioned about the product, about the business, but tell us a little bit more in terms of, how you can take them through the planning stage. Absolutely. Happy to do so. Really at that point, we had to really deep dive into looking at their business from multiple aspects. So kind of going back to the maximizing multiple variables idea, we started with the dollar value. And we could say, we can look at historical sales and say, let's just assume that we are going to grow the business at, 100%. And we just continue to grow the same products at that rate. What does that look like? So that's one variable to look at. Of course, it is by no means an accurate one, but it's it's some place to start. Then we also looked at what is the market, what will the market bear? So we looked at the market side of things. We also looked at products that were on the horizon, and if those new products might cannibalize some of the current products, on purpose. We also looked at what sales quotes we had in the pipeline already, since they may be much more, and they were in some cases, much more than their growth would show they should have. On the other hand, we had the opposite problem as well. And then there's also, in this business, there's also like customer contractual agreements for like inventory levels. So, we had to make sure that what we had agreed upon with customers was actually in our forecast. Or in some cases, what we had agreed upon with customers was like by no means coming true. And so we had to go back to them and say, wait a minute here, we agreed to this level of volume, but is that really going to happen? Because if we produced it,
Yeah.
and then none of it came true, we would not have product for the people who actually were going to order.
Yeah.
So we basically put all of these factors together, and then got the best minds, if you will,
Yeah.
throughout the sales, marketing, product organizations, and of
Yeah.
course executives and others as well,
Yeah.
and said, okay, what really makes sense and what is most likely to happen? Because of course the definition of a forecast is that it's always wrong.
Yeah.
It's just, will it be directional?
Yeah.
And is it directional enough so that
Yeah.
we can feel comfortable enough
Yeah.
spending money
Yeah.
to purchase long lead time items?
Okay.
We could spend money hiring people and those types of things.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're at a stalemate here, and we wouldn't be able to do anything. We just continue along the path. So we did that. And then what we did is we discovered, now that we have this forecast, we have to figure out what this means.
Yeah.
And so that's a whole nother matter.
Yeah.
And what it means in terms of what we should produce. Could we store it? Do we have the space to store it? Do we have the equipment needed?
Yeah.
And so then many times, and this was no exception, the devil is in the details and
Yep.
in the data.
Yep.
And so it always seems so much easier. I
Yeah.
have to say, it's always seems so much easier to turn it into like, this is what you should do, than it truly is in real life.
Yeah.
Because there's always some exception you have to account for. And you don't have to account for every exception in the minutest of detail, but what you need to do is make sure that it's going to give you a directionally correct answer. Because the last thing any company wants to do is go down the wrong path and be fully prepared for the wrong things to happen. So we did that, and we turned it into a people level forecast, at least for general areas of the business.
Okay.
Because they were no exception. They didn't have everything in their systems to the degree where it would just pop out.
Yeah.
So we got it in a directional forecast, and then we had to go present it to the executive team and say we needed to increase our people in these areas by like 30% in essence, in order to meet the forecast.
Yeah.
And the good news is we were able to gain that approval and start working with like what, there's always nuances here. So what types of skills, should we move people around, those kinds of things. So we looked at those options. And then there's also equipment needed.
Yeah.
Now, this is where trade-offs come into play as well. My favorite. We could just buy new equipment in this case for each cell, let's say.
Okay.
For each work area.
Yeah.
And we could do that. It would certainly cost more money.
Yeah.
However, we could try to scale back a little bit and purchase a little less equipment.
Okay.
But in this case, it's such an important aspect of the business and business growth. It made sense to invest in this equipment, even if we were investing, slightly more than was needed.
Yeah.
Because it could be used in other areas, and it was better to be prepared than sorry.
Yeah.
So we did invest in equipment. And so we had equipment and we had people.
Okay.
And from a storage point of view, we also looked at that. So I could, really the 80-20 here of this, because you probably have questions, is that we were able to look at getting a directional forecast. Then we turned it into people, most importantly, which skills, because as everybody knows, there aren't people available hanging from the trees these days. Equipment, which we really needed to place long term, and then long lead time items. We were able to start to set up some contracts with suppliers ahead of time, so we could get those in-house ahead of time to meet our forecast, which is really quite critical. And then also the storage capacity. There's really a new building that they were putting up, a new manufacturing facility. So it's a matter of how to navigate between the current manufacturing facility and the new one, and what we could do in an interim period. So we were working on that as well.
Yeah.
And then now where we are in the process is we're making sure to make it sustainable, which is very important, because I've worked with clients before and they thought, great, I have this. I have the decision, and now I'm, it's a lot of effort. I'm not sure that I want to do this on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
But they've always come back and said, that's I wish I hadn't have done that, because if life was stable, we wouldn't be in this situation in the first place.
Yeah.
So we've been spending time recently making sure that the process we went through, because we had to go through quite a bit of rigmarole to get the data working and flowing. How do we make that more sustainable so that they could take it on? Because the goal of the consultant is to be able to leave the client in a place where they can sustain the process on their own, and we're an expert to help them set it up, figure out how, and then move on. So that's the process we're in at the moment. Is usually, and this is true in this case too, it requires a little bit of a couple of months to go by where you can line the process out and have like issues arise that didn't arise during the first session, so that you can make sure that the folks who are in the company are able to sustain the process. And that's what we're working on now.
Okay, very interesting story, and obviously there's a lot to unpack there, especially if there are going to be any of slightly more less sophisticated planners, or the listeners who might not have as much experience with planning, and they might be scratching their head. Okay, I kind of see how this plan is going to be there, but I don't know how to go from point A to point B. So you mentioned a lot of different things. For example, the historical sales needs to be there. I don't know how long back do you go. At what level do you need to get the sales data when it comes to the products? And then you said that, I need to look at the inventory data. But then you also mentioned that, I need to look at people-focused planning. Now, I don't know what people-focused planning means. Is it going to be more at each of the individual people level? Is it going to be at the department level? So walk me through, maybe the spreadsheet that you are working on at a high level. What data elements you are looking for to go from point A to point B, so I have some understanding of the framework.
Okay, no problem. Well, let's start with sales, because it's always critical in my mind to know where you're going before you start executing. So on the sales forecasting side, in this case, we looked at 3 years of data in order to look at trends. Typically speaking, it depends on the client. It really does. In this case, we were really looking at growth rates because they were such a high growth business. In many cases, we might be looking at, they could have seasonality. They could have, just more of a combination of like last year and this year. The pandemic year caused strange fluctuations in the forecast. So each situation is different. Yeah. But generally speaking, for your audience, 2 to 3, really 3 years of forecast is really, or 3 years of history, I should say, is really important to be able to capture changing conditions. But that is by no means enough on its own.
Yeah. So is it going to be day by day basis, week by week, month by month, year by year?
Yeah. Good question. So in a sales inventory operations planning process, you meet monthly. And so you're generally going to bring in a month's worth of historical data, of course, each month. And so it's usually a rolling 2-year forecast. Okay. Generally speaking. When you start the process, sometimes we'll start with 1 year and then expands, because it depends, we got to start somewhere. It's more important to get started, get everybody aware and understanding the process than it is to worry about getting the perfect forecast or getting it out long periods of time. And in today's world, everything changes really quickly. So I would say you generally speaking want to have an 18-month to 2-year forecast. In this industry, that was fine. In some industries that have long contracts, like aerospace, like we've gone out 3 years because they have contracts that long. Yeah. And so that's about how long you would look out. And it's a rolling forecast. So you're bringing in history each month, and you are projecting out into the future. You don't start over again, obviously. It's more exception-based forecasting once you get the base together. And what I find is you start looking into certain product lines or certain customers. Yeah. And so you're always doing something to improve upon your forecast and your look at demand. You're getting customer information from your customers, your like sales information from your customers. So you're looking for demand further into your supply chain to ideally get a better demand plan of what you need to prepare for.
Okay, so tell us, a little bit more about the business. I don't know how big the business was, how many warehouses did they have? And in this particular planning, say, okay, I have my spreadsheet where I'm going back 18 months. I'm probably going, further 18 months, and I have these rows. But then you have some more variability there with respect to customers, because you need to also study, how many existing contracts that you have with the customers, because that is actually going to be a factor in this planning. So are you doing all of this on a spreadsheet, or did you utilize any sort of tool to be able to do this
Good.
planning?
Good point. So, so in this case, the business was global.
Yeah.
So there was multiple facilities in the U.S., although they were mainly manufacturing facilities. So we were looking at the forecast as one main number for the U.S. Then there was European regions, and
Okay.
there was Asian regions with multiple countries involved. So there was from a forecasting point of view, we were really starting the process by looking at regions, because that's just you start, generally speaking, you want to start larger so that you can get a more accurate directional forecast. And then you go into detail in the areas that are most meaningful to your business, or that are going to have a bigger impact on either your growth or your profitability or something like that. So it was global. It was a high growth, smaller area of a larger company. So, like I said, global company, multi-billion dollar, but basically the area was just, it was a relatively small area. So like 20 million, if you will, as far as the sales revenues in this particular area. And so, but it was critical to their overall growth. So it's, a classic example, right? You have large company with a high growth, high potential area that they really want to make sure that they service customers.
So let's say if I am starting on my SNOP journey, you told me all of this, and I'm actually going to create some sort of forecast. And Lisa, by looking at the forecast, you can probably throw it away. Because it's not going to work, because each product has its own nuances, each market has. So those are the nuances that I am looking to get from you. For example, in this particular market, this is a medical device, right? Medical device is going to have its own nuances. There are factors that you need to account for when you are planning for, let's say, I don't know, a coffee mug is going to be a very different planning than for a medical device. So tell us those nuances.
Absolutely. Well, and actually, you just reminded me that you asked me another question. I got off on the size of the business. But you asked me about the systems and how to develop the forecast. So in this case, they had a really good CRM system, Salesforce, and actually, but it's kind of funny because I have had many clients that are large, and I have some that are small, and it's all a matter of how they're using the systems, regardless of which system they have. So in this case, we really needed to utilize Salesforce more effectively, so that we could get it to the degree of detail needed to support a forecast model. So we did a dual path. So in this case, we said, let's follow the Salesforce path, because what we need to do is make this sustainable, and we really want to get the sales team to put information into the system, and it doesn't matter what system it is, but in this case, that's what they had. And they want to put it in enough detail so that we could use the forecast, which basically means we needed at least a product and some sort of timing. Right. So those are the two things we really needed to have in order to figure out what to produce. So, and we didn't have it at that level. We had more opportunities, dollars, those types of things. So, we did follow one path. We worked with the IT teams to say, this is how we certainly could use the system. And we started working with the client to help them move in that direction. So that's one path, but it wasn't enough to get us to the point where we really needed to get the SIOP process going quickly so that we could get in front of this wave. So what we did is we manually asked the sales team in this case for what key opportunities, because quotes would be coming from the sales. So what key opportunities do you have coming that you think will make a difference? We gathered them up, and we put them into Excel, basically. So that's what you do. And now, like I said, you have a parallel path. That was just for the quotes. For the historical data, we got that into Excel as well. And for the other, well, actually, we got the information from the customer inventory type agreements,
Yeah.
which could be put into a CRM system long term as well. Because some
Yeah.
of them, especially the more popular ones, have that ability. So that would be like a step 2. But in the meantime, we took it into Excel. So we created an Excel-based forecast, and so we have I have a data analyst on the team that created not just the forecast, but every client has this issue. So the issue is is that the data is not 100% cleansed, if you will. So we had to combine certain data together based upon customers that maybe they changed their name, or something happened to them, and we also had to do the same thing on the operations side of things. So we built some logic into this data model that supported these changes. And again, I think it's really quite critical not to develop something that's isolated in time. So we also are working on a parallel path to say, how do we make these sustainable for the future? So how do we build them into the ERP system? And they had a sophisticated ERP system as well. However, they had multiple, as is not uncommon, they had actually multiple systems that they use. That some are connected, some are not. And so we took data from each system and we synthesized what made sense to include in the model, and we did that. And then separately, we're working on how do we, again, I'm always concerned about how do we make this so that it's easy for the client to do it ongoing. So it's a parallel path process, but that is what we did in this case. They had multiple ERP systems. They had CRM system. They had, I guess Europe actually has perhaps a different system currently. So they basically they gave us the data from these separate systems, and we compiled it into one data model. And then, we had to run that by, the core team, if you will, because, it's always quite possible to get a bunch of data and then they say, oh my gosh, that makes no sense at all. So then we would go through product by product in this case, and said, does this make sense? And then this is, it's kind of fun actually, and it's kind of interesting. It always happens. Sales says, gosh, I didn't realize we had all those quotes for this item out there. That's actually a good thing, or that's actually concerning. It depends on the product. And so then they go back and they research it, and we had several sessions where we met with all the different people and brought it together into one.
So very interesting conversation overall. So you are obviously collaborating with salespeople, and you are bringing all of the codes that they might have right now. But let's say when you are working with the salespeople, how are they figuring out whether, I don't know if they're looking for just one data point, are they looking at multiple data points to be able to figure out if the numbers that you are trying to present, are they realistic or not? So I'm still struggling to understand how is this possible in case of a spreadsheet.
Well, it's not really it's a dynamic model that we created, even though it is in Excel, but it's not even, there's more involved than the Excel macros actually in the back end of this thing. But in essence, I'll just, your question is a really good one. So it depends on the level of sales. So like from an executive point of view, they wanted to know in this case, but does the forecast make sense at a high level? Like they're interested in dollars, right? So do we get to the right ballpark? But the people we're working with are generally speaking like the sales leader for this particular product line. And the sales leader, the other person we're working with is the head of product. For this particular business unit. We're also working with the people who are focused on new product development, which was a different set of people. And so those, I would say, I'm thinking about this. And then we brought in feedback from some of the key sales leaders that reported into the head sales leader. And those folks came into the picture when we had questions like, why does this one key customer sales look so high compared to what we think it should look like, or, vice versa. And then they would give us input. But those three areas, like I'd say sales and product, which also included marketing.
Okay.
Well, actually, there was a marketing person too. So I guess you'd say like key sales leader, marketing, product, and then new products in this case were the four key people. And what were they looking at? It was actually a very iterative discussion. So we weren't looking at one spreadsheet and just looking at a number. We were looking at growth rates in these.
Okay.
So we said, what do we expect the growth rate to be for next year? We started with that. And then that was one number we were looking at. The sales leader was looking at growth rates by product. Now, of course, when we first started, we had to translate those products into meaningful definitions, because usually when you get information out of a system, it's like no one knows what these, some folks know what these like items mean, and a lot of folks don't. We translated it in something meaningful. And then she was also looking at what are the dollar sales. So she was saying, like, what's the growth rate? What's the dollar sales? And that was a lot of what was going on in her mind.
Okay.
On the product side of things, he was looking at those two aspects as well. But then we started bringing quotes into the picture, and I would say that both of them what we did is we said we added quotes into a column, and we said, okay, wait a minute here. Here's the amount of quotes. Here's the growth rate, and here's the dollars. But we have more quotes in this case than we have forecasts. Does that make sense? Could it make sense? In some cases it could, some cases it didn't. So we looked at quotes, and then we re-looked again and said, okay, now that we've accounted for the quotes that are out there, does the forecast does it look a little too high now? And then we would go back and we'd say, okay, maybe we need to bring down some of these forecasts. And we went through the customers again and said, you know what, this one is transitioning out, so maybe we should reduce this a little bit. And we went through the whole forecast again, and then we said, okay, what number are we at now? And we did that probably at 5 different sessions minimally in order to get to one that we all felt comfortable with. And then we did the same thing with the inventory agreements with customers. And actually that did, in 1 or 2 cases, we had a situation where the forecast would be way higher than what we had come up with after like 5 sessions. We were like, goodness, this is frustrating. But then we got the sales folks involved, and the person who's the key contact for that customer talked to the customer, and we were able to dampen that forecast down for that particular time frame so that we could still get to something that made sense, because we didn't want to reduce any of the other items, because we felt strongly that they were going to sell at the levels we had put in place. But it would have made the whole forecast much higher than seemed realistic. So we ended up going back to it. So it's hard to say, but I'd say the 2 key things were, in this case, it's very different in each case, but in this case, growth rates was important because it was such a high growth business, in the total dollars, of course. And then we went through quotes, and we went through the inventory agreements. And then the other thing we did is we brought the new product people in place. And we, of course, as is typical, the new product folks started with higher numbers. It's normal. And then we said, well, okay, wait a minute now. That looks really high in comparison to everything else. Does that really make sense? Can we ramp up that quickly with customers? Will these products cannibalize anything else? And so we went and we retweaked all the other forecasts. And then, of course, because we did that, we had to go back to square one again and say, now does our forecast in total make sense? And so we did that. And then we came out, we were all comfortable. Now, remember, the definition of this forecast is that it's not going to be correct, because a forecast is never correct, but it would be directionally correct. And we all felt comfortable hiring people, purchasing equipment, and working with suppliers to get long lead time materials to support this forecast. Because if it didn't happen in the time frame we had, we knew it would happen a few months later, or it would be similar products. There wasn't anything that we would put the company at risk by doing so. Anyway, so that's where we ended up.
Okay, very interesting. So you seem to be referring the term directionally correct. So the people who might not be familiar with that, what does it mean? Is that a standard term that is used in the S&OP profession? Do you want to talk a little bit?
Good question, and I think it might be a term that I've just used, and I also use the term 80-20 a lot, and I mean it by the same. So what I mean by that is, generally speaking, when you're 80% correct, move, because otherwise the last 20%, by the time you move, like everything has moved on, the world has passed you by. So I mean directionally correct by enough of the forecast is what's going to happen in the future by product line. Because, by item, like it's hopeless. Like I had a client a couple of years ago, it was like insane. Although I have to give them like kudos for trying. But they were actually having the sales team forecast by item. It was like incredible. And I was saying, holy cow, because this is like so inaccurate. And you have the sales team looking at so much detail. So what I mean by directionally correct is, don't worry so much about the item level forecast overall. You worry about like groups of items, and it depends on the business. In this case, they had groups of items that were how they sell the items. They have groups of items and how you produce the items. So we looked at the forecast by groups of items and said, does this forecast for this group make sense? And it could be customers. So forecast by customers we looked at also. And actually we did look at that too. I forgot to mention it because we had graphs for key customers, and we said, does this key customer growth trend look correct for the next several years? And in some cases we said, wow, that does not look correct. What were we thinking? So we went back and we had to tweak those numbers too. So it's, when I say directionally correct, is by a larger grouping of some sort that is meaningful to, in this case, it could be to customers, to products, and then the products, generally speaking, and in this case they did, translate into people of certain skills, or people in certain areas on the manufacturing floor. And it also could turn into certain types of long lead time materials. So, it's something that will give you a forecast where you can take action. So, and it very much depends on the company, the industry, and other factors as to what those meaningful directionally correct areas are. But in this case, there were certain groups of products. Does that help to explain what I mean by directionally correct?
It does. It does. Thank you so much for that. So I actually want to touch, you seem to be referring the customer as well as product, and there might be a little bit of overlap when you look at the customer group and the product as well. So are you comparing, first you are doing the forecast based on customers, and then you are comparing that with the forecast at the item level, or are you combining all of this together and creating this one forecast? Do you want to touch a little bit on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. So we slice and dice it both ways. So, and I say every SIOP type project, we're going to look at something by customer and something by groups of items. And like, in this case, I'll throw out aerospace because it's kind of interesting, but like some, like a 737 airplane, like there's some groups of products that are like by categories like that. But nevertheless, when you look at it by product, it could look perfectly fine. And then when you look at by customer, it makes no sense at all. So you have to look at it both ways. Well, there could be more, but at least those two ways. And then you say, okay, now that we see it by, let's say it looks fine by product, but it does not make sense by customer. Well, then we have to go back and say, okay, which customers are these? You don't just make things up. You really need to go talk to those customers. You need to talk to the salespeople. It depends on the situation. The marketing folks. It depends who knows. And in some cases, my clients are helping their customers like understand their business too by asking these questions. So it's more of a conversation because no one has the answer. We actually may be picking up on a trend that the customer or maybe the customer's customer didn't even know was happening. And especially in today's environment, because as folks are experiencing all the supply chain challenges, which is one of the reasons why SIOP is so popular, because you can get a better handle on how you can better service customers and scale the business. But as that's happening, if your competitors don't have product available, well, customers are changing. They don't want to wait. So they're figuring it out. They're ordering it from someone else, or they're changing products. And then they're figuring out, you know what, this is a good idea. Maybe I'll do this ongoing. So the customers' buying behaviors are changing on the fly. And the only way you can be successful is to be ever looking at those changing conditions and incorporating them into your process. So that's why this is so important. And it's very important to be in conversation with your customers and your suppliers, because your suppliers sometimes pick up on these trends as well. So you have to be in contact with your end-to-end supply chain to be successful.
Yeah. So once you actually get the forecast, so what are you doing after that? Are you able to, let's say, utilize that in conjunction with your ERP system and figure out, which parts you are going to be short? Because see, some of the examples that you mentioned, for example, 737 airplane, and now in that you could have a lot of different dependent parts, and they might have their own lead time, and then you need to figure out, how to plan for that. Obviously, you cannot do that on a spreadsheet.
Yeah,
That could get really complex.
Well, you're absolutely right. And in this case, like, E. coli proteins, there's quite a bit involved in that as well. But the 737 airplane or another client, they have equipment used to produce feeders that are helpful to producing food type items. So like you said, there's a lot of moving parts. So it never seems as easy on the operational side as it is on the sales side, which sounds kind of strange, because to your point, the ERP system is there to help you. Most of the time, though, even clients that have sophisticated ERP systems, generally speaking, need additional, need to look at data differently than they already have it set up to look at.
Yeah.
So in this case, there was no exception. So I say that at the beginning here because this client is extremely normal for clients of all sizes. Even multi-billion-dollar companies, frequent occurrence that they have challenges. So in this case, we had to translate it from dollars, of course, into units.
Yeah.
And in this case, you can look at an average sale price, and that sometimes could help you along the way. Although these days that's challenging too, because sales prices are changing pretty frequently. That's a tricky. But in this case, we looked at units from the past sales data, which was fine, although it really didn't, in this case, get us to it, because what you generally speaking need is you need some sort of a standard unit for the production area you're talking about. So, because let's just say you have cases of product, and you have milligrams of product, and you have ounces of product. Well, those are very different things. You can't just say 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. It does not work. So we had to convert all the different units into a like unit of measure. And generally speaking, that's going to be the lowest level. Of course, you can't add 1 inch + 2 inch and then do your have a unit of measure that's in feet, as an example. That doesn't relate to them, but you can't just say how many feet is it if everything you do is in centimeters or something. So basically, you want to have the lowest level unit. So we and this is where some of the back end sophistication on the data model came into play, because we did convert it, and the first conversion was pretty typical. It was adding, dividing, etc. However, as is common also across the board with clients, more and more business is custom. So it's kind of made to the customer requirements. So in this case, we had to figure out what those custom requirements meant in terms of a unit measure, and how do we convert them into a standard unit measure. And that was not as simple as it seems. So we did build we worked with the client, and then we built the right logic into the data model so that we could convert. So that was very important, because once we got it converted into a base unit of measure, and I call that the base unit of measure, which is really a common unit of measure, so that you could say, instead of ounces, milligrams, etc., you could use milligrams or whatever across the board. So the base unit of measure it took some effort to get it to the base unit of measure, which is extremely normal. And then from there, we had to say, well, what does that mean, though? So how do we translate that into long lead time materials? And even once we did that, the question is it's never as simple as like X people. Never have yet, after doing these types of processes and working with manufacturing for 30 years, never have seen that happen where it's just one number. So basically you have to, there's always more questions. Like it takes higher skilled people in this particular area to do to do this particular function in manufacturing, and they were no exception. So they had some jobs that were higher level skills, some that were more lower level, if you will, or medium level in this case, skills. So we had to figure out, how do we figure out how many of each of those types of people we needed? So we had to work with the operations folks, and again, directionally correct. We came up with a way to back into the number of people that they had currently, and of each of those types, which of course is more complicated because you have folks who are cross-trained, and so then it always gets the equation a little complicated. But basically, how many do they have today, and then how many would they need? So we worked with the operations folks. We looked at the data, and we came up with directionally correct. How many additional people would we need to add to the area in this case? There was multiple areas, so we actually had to add them to a couple of different areas in operations. And then once we got to that point, it wasn't really enough, because we couldn't just go to the executive saying, trust me, we need to add 7 people to this area. We need to add 10 people to this other area. They would say, no, I don't think so. So we had to come up with a way to present this, present our data from the data from our forecast, and turn it into a directionally correct number, and put it in a way that was understandable to the executive team, and present that in the SIOP meeting, which is what we did. And then they, of course, all this work, and then they're like, well, of course, why didn't you hire them already? Because once you present it in a reasonable manner, of course, it's easy for anyone to make that decision, because they'd rather either grow or hire people and grow, or stop growing. I mean, those are the choices.
All right, Lisa, so that's it for today. Do you have any last-minute closing thoughts or remarks for all the listeners?
Well, as you picked up on, I think one of the keys here is that this process, sales, inventory, operations planning, is not an off-the-shelf type of a process. It's got to be tailored to each situation, but there are definitely concepts that apply. And so, really, I think the best way to look at this is, start with a common sense approach, and be looking at, what you're going to sell. How do you get better information into your supply chain? Working with cross-functional team internally, that goes a really long way. And then how do you translate this into what you'd need from a manufacturing point of view, a people point of view, a storage point of view, long lead time materials. In other cases, engineering support is heavy, because I've worked with several engineer to order type companies that never think they can predict, and they can. We've done it many times. So how do you get those capacity? How do you turn it into those capacity requirements? And sometimes just starting with the logic is perfectly. It's like a great place to start, really. And then you want to make sure. It's funny, because all this work, it sounds like there's a lot of data, a lot of technical aspects, but the biggest benefit is really getting your team all on the same page in the end. So you have your sales team understanding what's going on in operations, you have your operations understanding what's going on in R&D, and you have your finance folks who may be on some completely different page, understanding, what kind of inventory this is going to require, or what's required to support growth. So getting the people on one page is actually much more valuable than even understanding what the forecast is and how you execute against it. It's kind of interesting, because it translates into bottom line profit faster than anything else, is once we get the people on the same page, which generally speaking takes, a cycle or two. And then folks start, getting into the process, especially as they get their needs met. Sales has what they need when they need it. Operations can get their people approved. and they can get the resources they need to support their needs, then things start leveling out. So I would say overall, look at it as a common sense equation, and and look at getting all your people together on one page to start the process.
Could not agree more. And my personal takeaway from this conversation is going to be sales and operations process is always going to be very involved. There are going to be a lot of moving parts. So make sure you are not taking very bogged down approach. Just be directionally correct with your planning and just move forward with it. On that note, I really want to thank you for your time, Lisa. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Thanks for your great questions.
Of course. I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Lisa, head over to lma-consultinggroup.com. It's lma-consultinggroup.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with DC Spragula, who discusses why companies should spend less time worrying about forecasting accuracy and more on execution. Also, the interview with Mike Ryan, who discusses how to do sales and operations planning appropriately for a growing business. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to get you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.